Steve Jobs had 3 rules of life. First one was, your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Number 2, don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of other people's opinions drown out your own inner voice. And number 3, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Great leaders, of course, make smart decisions, even in difficult circumstances. From Albert Einstein to Oprah Winfrey, many top leaders ascribe their success to having followed their intuition. Intuition, of course, the idea that individuals can make successful decisions without deliberate, rational or analytical thought, has intrigued philosophers and scientists at least since the time of the ancient Greeks. But scientists have had trouble finding quantifiable evidence that intuition actually exists. Have you ever had an experience where you felt something is not quite right? Or feeling negative around someone without knowing why? Or you've entered a room where there are other people milling around and you pick up a certain vibe? And if you have experienced this before, have you just shrugged it off, dismissing it as illogical nonsense? Our culture, of course, has taught us to believe that rationality is what should prevail when making important decisions. But what of that inner voice, that gut feeling, we say, that intuitive feeling from within that tells us how we feel from beneath the layers of rationality and logic? Intuition is a process that gives us the ability to know something directly without any analytical reasoning, bridging the gap between the conscious and the non-conscious parts of our mind. When we consider Eastern religions and philosophy, we discover that intuition is mostly intertwined with religion and spirituality. In Buddhist thinking, intuition is a way of grasping reality, considered to be superior to fact-gathering and rationality, that takes the insight from intuition on board with its wholeness rather than the bits and pieces of our rational mind. For Buddhists, this form of awareness is associated with what is called the wisdom mind or the Buddha nature. And there are 2 levels of the Buddha nature, the ultimate level and the relative level. The ultimate level is associated with pure, non-dual awareness and is open to the mysterious aspects of being. At the relative level of everyday life, the Buddha mind is concerned with the development of compassion, loving kindness, and unconditional acceptance. And according to Tibetan Buddhism, this Buddha mind is something that we all possess. It is the ground of our being, to borrow a phrase from Paul Tillich. As Christians, we would say it is God-given. This insight that our Buddha mind, or in Hindu terms, the foundational self, is not something that we have to strive for, seeking to attain it, but something we merely need to wake up to become aware of. And in the Christian context, St. Paul tells us that truths are known only through the Spirit. In Romans 8, he says this, "But you are not in the flesh, you are in the Spirit, since the Spirit of God dwells within you. The Spirit of God dwells within you. Those of you who attended Ian Gawler's book launch a few weeks back may remember that Ian talked about the thoughts and emotions of what he called the active mind, which is sort of like the rational mind. And then he talked about the peace and the clarity and the loving kindness that comes through experiencing the still mind. Two minds, the active mind and the still mind. In the Chinese philosophy of Tao, Tao is the natural order of the universe, whose character one's intuition must discern in order to realise the potential for individual wisdom. And this intuitive knowing of life cannot be grasped as an idea or a concept. It is known through actual living experience of one's everyday life and being. People, of course, were gripped by Jesus' intuitive powers. They grasped, not sentimentally, but in a way that a penetrating intuition seizes you by the collar and challenges your thinking, somehow brings you up short in your personal reality. So people's first reaction to some of the things that Jesus said was shock. The crowds, individuals, the disciples were startled over and over and over again by what he said. But after that shock comes a breakthrough, the purifying catharsis that has the potential to bring you to a new place, a spiritual place in your life. More recently, a group of psychologists from the University of New South Wales have come up with a novel technique or experiment demonstrating just how much unconscious intuition can inform and even improve our decision-making in life. They published their findings in the journal Psychological Science. And Joel Pearson, Associate Professor, one of the authors, states this: many people use the phrase intuition to describe a sensation or feeling they have when making decisions. But these are only descriptions. They don't provide strong evidence that we can use unconscious information in our brain or body to guide our behaviour. This is the first time, as a bunch of scientists, we have been able to show strong evidence that something like intuition actually exists. Why aren't we true then to our deepest intuitions? Could I provide you with a number of reasons? First, our capacity for intuition may be undeveloped. We may even be unaware that we have such a capacity. We may be aware theoretically that intuition is one of our personal skills, but we've not worked on it. We may even be suspicious of it, particularly if we believe the notion that the only reliable access we have to reality is through our senses and our logic and reasoning. Second, we may not trust our own observations or discernments. We think that others know better than we do, and so we defer to them. And maybe our problem may be that we haven't matured enough. We're scared to trust our judgment and to look to others as mother or father figures or as mentors who will tell us what to do or think. Jesus was insistent when he advised, "Don't call another man father or rabbi." Jesus was saying, in effect, here are a few hints, work it out for yourselves. Many people, of course, don't trust themselves, trust their discernment, because they're captive to persuasive mythologies and ideologies. They find it hard to resist them. And some people don't want to put their intuition against the mythology or ideology, the dogma, because the dogma is their security. And in the Christian church context, many of us were taught the dogma before we had much experience in life. And to challenge the dogma then is to challenge reality as we have seen it. And third, trusting our intuition can threaten our relationships. If we back our intuition against the dogma we once held sacred, we risk alienating those who sometimes are closest to us. We can offend those who have supported us. And even if the bonds are not severed, the relationship does not have the same feeling and same intimacy. In the life of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, his early followers looked to him as an example of the ascetic ideal. They rejected him utterly when he relinquished the austerities that almost brought about his death and hindered rather than facilitated his quest for enlightenment. And fourth, there are penalties for disobedience, for relying on one's intuition, judgment, insight against accepted opinion. This often happens when one changes from a monotheistic religion to another, or from atheism to faith, such as in the case of Malcolm Muggeridge when he converted to Catholicism after being an atheist for most of his life. And finally, fifth, some hesitate to follow up their intuitive insights because of the consequences involved in honouring them. Very often the insights from our intuition demand that we change our worldview and in ourselves, the way we live, in our values and priorities, and we can find this challenging and very difficult. How then can we live and be true to our deepest intuitions? Perhaps one of the first things we can do is to make a commitment to our continuing growth and development as people through exploring the spiritual path, to exploring paths to spiritual and personal maturity that we may not have considered before, and using the resources of all faiths while remaining grounded in our own. We can develop the capacity for an openness to the Spirit, to the Tao, to the Logos of God, to your innate Buddha nature, your deeper self, your essential essence, and to the ground of your being. This dimension of reality is known through intuitive awareness, though it is beyond words to describe it. What is required is an openness of mind and heart beyond images and rational discourse. Was not this that Jesus was talking about when he spoke of faith? At its centre, faith is openness to reality and ultimately to God. Our benediction or blessing. Go into the seething cauldron of the world. Listen for the questions and voices that you would rather not hear. Answer them with the energy of the divine Spirit, the power of the one who gives us life and the boundless love of the Christ. Amen.